The transport flipped 3 times before it stopped moving, and by the time it did, half the soldiers inside were already dead. I know because I checked every single one of them. That is what a combat medic does. You do not run first. You check pulses. You press your fingers against necks and wrists and you count the seconds between heartbeats, and when those seconds stretch into nothing, you move on to the next body and try again. My name is Elias Cade, Sergeant, Human Peacekeeping Attachment, and on that day in the Gravane Corridor, I checked 9 pulses and found 3. The ambush had been clean and professional. Rebel forces hit our convoy from both ridgelines at once, pouring fire down into the narrow canyon pass like water through a funnel. Our Valeth escort vehicles took the first volley. Crystalline armor shattered under heavy plasma, and the insectoid soldiers inside spilled out into the open, wings flaring uselessly as more fire rained down. I saw Commander Vaitha, the ranking Valeth officer, take a direct hit to her thorax that punched through her chest plate and dropped her where she stood. I was already moving toward her when the second explosion turned our transport into a rolling coffin of twisted metal and broken glass. When I crawled out of the wreckage, my ears ringing and my left arm numb from shoulder to fingertip, the canyon was a graveyard, burning vehicles, bodies, the sharp, sweet smell of Valeth blood, which is not really blood at all, but a crystalline fluid that catches the light even when it is pooling in the dirt. I found 3 survivors in the transport, 2 Valeth soldiers with moderate injuries, and a human private named Danny Holt, who had a concussion and a broken collarbone. I stabilized all 3, applied pressure bandages to the Valeth wounds with materials from my kit, and fashioned a sling for Danny's arm from a strip of seat cover. Then the third explosion happened, and it was closer than the first 2, and the ground beneath my feet bucked hard enough to throw me sideways into a rock wall. When I opened my eyes, the canyon was full of dust and smoke, and my 3 survivors were on the other side of a fresh rock slide that had cut the passage in half. I could hear Danny shouting my name through the rubble. I shouted back. Told him to get the others moving south toward Loyalist lines. Told him I would find another way around. Told him not to wait for me, he argued. I outranked him. He stopped arguing. I stood alone in a burning canyon in rebel-controlled territory, with a damaged comm unit, a sidearm with 32 rounds, a medic's field kit, and no clear path in any direction that did not lead deeper into enemy land. My comm could receive fragments of chatter, but could not transmit anything coherent. The encryption module had cracked in the crash, and every time I tried to send, the signal dissolved into static before it reached anyone. I was, by every military definition of the term, on my own. I moved east because west was a wall of collapsed rock, north was where the rebels had fired from, and south was where Danny and the others were heading, which meant it was the direction the rebels would expect any survivor to go. East took me into the Valeth wilderness, a landscape that looked like someone had taken a forest and rebuilt it out of glass. Crystalline trees with translucent trunks rose 40 meters into a sky tinged violet by atmospheric particles. The ground was covered in a moss-like growth that glowed faintly blue wherever I stepped on it, which meant I was leaving a trail of light behind me, like a runway strip for anyone who wanted to follow. I scraped the bioluminescent residue off my boots every 100 meters and kept moving. 4 hours into my march, I found the outpost. It was a rebel forward operating base that had been abandoned in a hurry. Equipment left behind, supply crates half emptied, a communications relay still powered up, but broadcasting nothing. They had pulled out recently, maybe within the last day, probably redeployed to wherever the main rebel force was consolidating. I swept the structure for threats, found none, and started scavenging. I found water, field rations compatible with human biology, a replacement power cell for my comm unit that did not fit, but could be jury-rigged if I was patient, and a data terminal that had not been wiped. The terminal held encrypted files. Most of them were beyond my translation software's ability to crack in real time, but the encryption on the older files was weaker, and my suit's processor chewed through them one at a time while I ate and drank and tried to get my left arm to stop tingling. Troop movements, supply chains, patrol routes, all useful if I ever made it back to friendly lines. I copied everything to my suit's storage and kept scrolling. Then I found the file that changed everything. It was not encrypted like the others. It was buried in a subfolder labeled with a Valeth word my translator rendered as leverage. The file was a video recording, time-stamped 11 days ago, and when I opened it, the screen filled with the image of a small room with no windows and a single light source that cast harsh shadows on bare crystal walls. In the center of the room, huddled on the floor with her wings folded tight against her back, was a child. She was Valeth, young, very young, the equivalent of a human child of maybe 6 or 7 years. Her crystalline skin, which should have been bright and iridescent, was dull and flaking. Her wings were crumpled, the delicate membranes torn in places and clearly not healing. She was thin in a way that made my medic's instincts scream, because I have seen malnutrition across 3 species, and it always looks the same. It always looks like the body is consuming itself. The child was speaking, whispering really, in broken common, the galactic trade language that Valeth royalty had been teaching their children as part of the diplomatic exchange program with Earth. Her voice was small and cracked and steady, in the way that only a child's voice can be steady when they have been alone so long that fear has become the normal state. "Mom," she said. "Mom, please come get me. I am being good. I am being so good. They said if I am good, you will come. Why will you not come? I miss you, Mom. I miss the garden. I miss the singing. Please come. Please." I knew who she was. I had seen her face in briefing packets, in intelligence summaries, in the background of diplomatic footage that played on the news feeds back on the human ships. Princess Lyrith, youngest daughter of Sovereign Thesara, Queen of the Valeth sovereignty. She had been taken 6 months ago by rebel forces during a raid on a loyalist outpost. Warlord Drozan, the most powerful rebel commander, had claimed her as a political hostage. The official intelligence assessment was that she was probably dead. The Queen had been paralyzed ever since, unable to launch a full offensive, because Drozan's message had been simple and absolute. Attack me, and the child dies. 6 months. This child had been in a cell for 6 months, whispering to a mother who could not hear her, being good, because someone had told her that being good would bring her mother back. I played the recording again. And again. I watched her whisper the word, "Mom," 3 more times. And each time it sounded exactly the same. Not like a Valeth word, not like a human word, like a universal word, like a word that exists in every language on every world, because every species that has ever loved a child has needed a word for the person who will come for them in the dark. I sat in that abandoned outpost for a long time. My comm was still broken. My extraction window was 48 hours away. I had coordinates from the data terminal showing exactly where the child was being held. Fortress Korath, a rebel stronghold carved into a crystalline mountain 3 valleys to the east. A brutal march through hostile territory. No authorization, no support, no backup. No reason to go except the sound of a child's voice asking why her mother would not come. I am not a hero. I need to be clear about that. I am a medic. I fix broken bodies. I carry bandages and tourniquets and injectable pain relief. I have a sidearm because regulations require it, not because I am good with it. I am not special forces. I am not trained for solo infiltration of enemy strongholds. I am a 31-year-old man from a town in Oregon who joined the Peacekeeping Corps because the recruiter said I could help people across the stars, and that sounded better than helping people across the county. But I am also human, and being human means something in this galaxy, whether we like it or not. It means we come from a world that classified as a death planet by every survey team that ever studied it. It means our bones are denser, our muscles are stronger, our endurance is longer, and our tolerance for pain is higher than almost any other species in the known galaxy. It means we evolved in an environment that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us in every way imaginable, and we survived all of it, and we came out the other side as the most stubborn, adaptable, and unreasonably persistent predators the universe has ever produced. I packed my gear. I checked my sidearm. I loaded the coordinates into my suit's navigation system. I watched the recording one last time, and when the child said "Mom" again, I turned off the terminal and walked out of the outpost and headed east. The dawn was coming up over the crystal forest, turning everything gold and violet, and from the ridgeline, I could see the valley that led toward the fortress. It was beautiful, in the way that alien worlds are always beautiful, which is to say, it was beautiful in a way that reminded you that you were very far from home and very much alone. I stood there for a moment, looking at the impossible distance between me and a child who was waiting for someone to come. And I thought about the fact that every species in this galaxy apparently says "mom" the same way. Like it is the only word that matters. Like it is the first word you learn, and the last word you forget, and the one word that, no matter how old you get or how far you travel, still means safety. I started walking. The march to Fortress Korath took 14 hours, and every single one of them tried to kill me in a different way. The crystal forest gave way to a region of broken terrain that the Vaylith called the Shattered Reach, a landscape of razor-edged crystal formations that rose from the ground like the teeth of some enormous buried predator. The edges were sharp enough to slice through standard-issue boots, and within the first hour, I had cuts on both shins that bled steadily and attracted small flying organisms that swarmed around my legs like mosquitoes made of glass. I wrapped my lower legs in strips from my emergency blanket, sealed the cuts with medical adhesive from my kit, and kept moving. The second valley was flooded with a river that my suit's chemical sensors flagged as mildly toxic. The water contained dissolved crystalline compounds that would cause severe chemical burns to Vaylith's skin on contact, which was probably why there were no bridges and no patrol routes anywhere near it. For a human, the compounds were an irritant, nothing more. My skin turned red and itched fiercely for 2 hours after I waded across chest deep. But the burns were superficial and faded on their own. I made a mental note to include this crossing in my report, if I ever lived long enough to file one. The third obstacle was a cliff face. Not a gentle slope, not a manageable climb, but a vertical wall of crystal that rose 60 meters straight up, with no handholds that a Vaylith could use, because their wings would prevent them from pressing close enough to the rock face to grip anything. I am not a rock climber. I have never been a rock climber. But I have human fingers, which are longer and more dexterous than Vaylith manipulators. And I have human shoulders, which are narrower than a Vaylith thorax. And I have the kind of desperate, stupid courage that only manifests when you know there is a child at the end of the climb who is counting the days until someone comes. I climbed. It took 2 hours. I fell twice, catching myself both times by jamming my fingers into cracks in the crystal until my nails bled. At the top, I lay on my back gasping for 5 minutes and watched the alien sky spin above me and thought about how the recruitment poster had said, "See the galaxy." They had not mentioned anything about climbing glass walls with bleeding hands. After the cliff, the terrain flattened into a plateau swept by electromagnetic storms. The air crackled with energy, and lightning arced between crystal spires in patterns that were almost beautiful if you ignored the fact that each bolt carried enough charge to stop a Vaylith heart. The bioelectric sensory systems that the Vaylith used for navigation and communication were overwhelmed in conditions like this, which made the plateau a natural barrier that no rebel patrol would cross voluntarily. For me, it was a headache. A brutal, pounding headache that sat behind my eyes and made my vision blur at the edges. But just a headache. I popped 2 painkillers from my kit, tucked my chin against my chest, and walked straight through. On the far side of the plateau, I ran into my first rebel patrol. There were 4 of them, moving along a ridgeline in a standard diamond formation. Vaylith soldiers in light combat armor, carrying plasma rifles, scanning the terrain with the casual confidence of troops operating in their own territory. I saw them before they saw me, because I was lower on the slope and the crystal formations gave me cover. I went flat, pressed myself into a crevice between 2 formations, and let them pass above me close enough that I could hear the clicking sounds their mandibles made when they communicated in their native language. My translator caught fragments. Shift change, patrol rotation, something about rations being late, normal soldier complaints, universal across species. They passed. I waited 10 minutes, then moved on. The second patrol was not so easy to avoid. 5 soldiers, this time at a checkpoint where the trail narrowed between 2 massive crystal pillars. There was no way around them. The terrain on either side dropped into ravines too deep to climb down safely, and going back would cost me hours I did not have. The data from the rebel terminal had included a detail that was now burning in my mind like a countdown timer. Warlord Drozan was planning to move the princess to a more secure location in 30 hours. After that transfer, she would be somewhere I could never reach. I had to get through. I studied the checkpoint for 20 minutes. 5 soldiers, 2 standing guard at the pillars, 1 operating a sensor station, 2 resting behind a barricade, weapons within reach. The sensor station was the problem. It would detect my approach from 50 meters out unless I could disable it first. I found a loose crystal formation the size of my fist, charged it with a pulse from my comm unit's remaining power cell, and threw it hard to the left of the checkpoint. It hit a crystal spire and discharged in a flash of electromagnetic energy that blanked the sensor station for exactly the 3 seconds I needed to close the distance to the first guard. What happened next was not pretty, and I will not pretend it was. I am a medic. I know Valith anatomy better than most human soldiers, because it is my job to know how to save Valith lives. That same knowledge tells me exactly where the nerve clusters are, where the pressure points sit along the thoracic ridge, where a precise strike will cause unconsciousness without permanent damage. The first guard went down before he could shout. The second turned toward the sound and met my elbow at the junction of his cervical plates. The sensor operator reached for her weapon, and I swept her legs and applied pressure to the nerve cluster at the base of her skull. The 2 resting soldiers scrambled up, and I threw my second stun grenade, one of only 2 I had, into the space between them. The concussive pulse knocked them both flat. 5 soldiers down in 11 seconds, none dead, all unconscious. The last one to fall looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes before the stun grenade hit, and I heard her whisper a single word in common: Death Worlder. I took their communications equipment, a fresh power cell, and 2 ration packs. I secured their weapons out of reach so they would not be able to pursue immediately when they woke, and I moved on. From the captured comm unit, I started intercepting rebel transmissions, and the picture they painted was bleak. The Queen's forces were barely holding their lines. Every day, more territory fell to the rebels. Diplomatic channels had produced nothing but formal statements of concern from species that had no intention of intervening. The galactic community had expressed deep regret about the situation. Deep regret and nothing else. One transmission stood out, a communication between 2 rebel commanders discussing the princess. They spoke about her the way you would speak about a piece of equipment, her condition, her usefulness, how long she remained viable as leverage. One of them mentioned that Drozan had considered simply eliminating her now that the Queen seemed broken enough, but decided to keep her alive as insurance against any last desperate offensive. The mother does nothing as long as the child breathes, the commander said. That is the value of offspring. They make the strong weak. I turned off the intercepted comm and kept walking. The anger that had been building in my chest since I watched that recording had settled into something cold and hard and very, very quiet. I am a medic. I save lives. I do not go looking for fights. But there are times when the universe puts something in front of you that is so deeply wrong that not acting becomes its own kind of violence, and walking away becomes the cruelest thing you could do. I reached the final ridge overlooking Fortress Korath, just as the sun began to set, painting the crystal mountain in shades of amber and deep red. The fortress was exactly what the intelligence files had described, and worse. It was carved into the face of a massive crystalline peak, part natural cave system and part constructed stronghold, and it was crawling with soldiers. I counted at least 200 visible from my position, and there were certainly more inside. Anti-aircraft batteries on the upper ramparts, shield generators humming with energy I could feel in my teeth, supply vehicles moving in and out of a main gate that was guarded by a full platoon. A frontal assault by an entire battalion would be costly. For one man with a sidearm and a medic's kit, it was beyond impossible. It was absurd. It was the kind of plan that only a human would consider, because only a human would look at those odds and think, well, I have to try. I spent 3 hours on that ridge as darkness fell, watching through my suit's optical enhancement. I cataloged patrol patterns, shift rotations, guard positions, supply schedules. I mapped every entrance and exit I could see, and then I found it. On the western face of the fortress, partially hidden behind a growth of crystal formations, there was a drainage channel, a waste outlet from the look of it, where the fortress expelled excess fluid and organic refuse. It was narrow, it was disgusting, and it was completely unguarded because no Valith could fit through it. Their wings and broad thoraxes made it physically impossible. But a human? A human is a strange, narrow, flexible predator from a world where our ancestors survived by squeezing into caves and crawling through spaces that no predator could follow. We do not have wings. Our shoulders can compress. Our bodies can contort into positions that would be anatomically impossible for most galactic species. I stripped my gear down to essentials: sidearm, medkit, knife, one remaining stun grenade. I left everything else hidden in a crevice on the ridge, marking the location on my suit's map. Then I made my way down the slope in total darkness, moving from shadow to shadow until I reached the western face of the fortress and the mouth of the drainage channel. The smell hit me first. I will not describe it in detail because some things are better left to the imagination, but I will say that it was the worst thing I had ever encountered, and I once treated a soldier who had been living inside the decomposing carcass of a Korvathi swamp beast for 3 days. The channel was barely wide enough for my shoulders, and the walls were slick with substances I refused to identify. I took one last breath of clean air, sealed my mouth shut, and started crawling. The crystal walls scraped skin off my shoulders and back. The channel twisted and turned in ways that forced me to contort my body around corners that seemed designed to stop anything from getting through. At one point I got stuck, wedged between 2 walls that were narrower than my ribcage, and I had to exhale every molecule of air in my lungs and push with my toes and fingers until something in my shoulder popped, and I scraped through with a strip of skin left behind on the crystal. I kept crawling. Behind me, in the darkness, something dripped. Ahead of me, in the darkness, something waited. And in the space between, a human being dragged himself through filth and pain toward a child he had never met, because someone had to, and no one else was coming. I emerged from the drainage channel into the fortress's lower infrastructure level covered in filth, bleeding from a dozen scrapes across my back and shoulders, and running on a combination of adrenaline, field rations, and the kind of desperate determination that only kicks in when your brain has already accepted that rational decision-making left the building about 12 hours ago. The space I crawled into was a maintenance tunnel, dimly lit by crystalline light panels that cast everything in a pale blue glow. Pipes ran along the ceiling carrying fluids I did not want to think about. The air was warmer here, heated by the fortress's power system somewhere deeper inside, and it carried the constant low hum of machinery. I cleaned myself as best I could with antiseptic wipes from my medkit, sealed the worst of my scrapes with liquid bandage, and took stock of my situation. I was inside an enemy stronghold with several hundred rebel soldiers between me and the exit. I had a sidearm with 28 rounds, a knife, 1 stun grenade, and a medic's kit that was running low on supplies. My advantages were exactly 2. First, no one knew I was here. Second, no one expected a human to be here, because no sane tactical analysis would predict a single human infiltrating a fortified position through a waste channel. The Vaylith did not think like humans. They could not imagine someone doing what I had just done, because to them it would be unthinkable. I used the captured rebel comm unit to monitor guard frequencies as I moved through the maintenance tunnels. The fortress was structured in layers, with the military and command sections at the top, living quarters and support functions in the middle, and infrastructure and detention at the bottom. The detention level was my target, and I was already in the right general area, but there were layers of security between me and the cells. I needed to navigate carefully. The maintenance tunnels were my highway. They ran parallel to the main corridors, connected by access hatches at regular intervals, and they were too cramped for Vaylith soldiers to use comfortably, which meant they were mostly empty. I moved through them like a ghost, pausing at every access hatch to listen for activity on the other side, checking my captured comm for patrol schedules, timing my movements to the gaps between guard rotations. Months of joint operations with Vaylith forces had taught me their architectural patterns, their security protocols, their blind spots. I knew how their surveillance systems worked, how their door locks could be bypassed, how their patrol schedules followed predictable mathematical patterns, because the Vaylith mind preferred order and symmetry in all things. I reached the detention level after 40 minutes of crawling and creeping through the guts of the fortress. The transition was obvious. The maintenance tunnels here were reinforced with heavier crystal, and the air carried the flat, dead quality of a space designed to contain rather than house. Through an access hatch, I could see the detention corridor. It was exactly as bad as I had feared. 4 guards at the main entrance, armed and alert. Surveillance crystals at every junction. The Valith equivalent of cameras, biological constructs that recorded visual and bioelectric data and fed it back to a central monitoring station. Patrol teams moving through every 15 minutes with military precision. There was no way to fight through this. Even if I could somehow take down 4 guards silently, the surveillance crystals would catch me, and the response would be overwhelming. I needed another way in. I backtracked through the maintenance tunnel, tracing the route of an old ventilation system that I had noticed on my way down. It was partially decommissioned, the intakes sealed at some access points, but the main ducts were still intact, and they ran parallel to every corridor in this section, including the detention level. The ducts were even narrower than the drainage channel, and after what I had already crawled through, that was saying something. But I fit. Barely. With my arms extended ahead of me, and my body flat, I could pull myself forward by my fingertips, inch by inch, through ducts that were never designed for anything larger than air circulation. I navigated by sound. Through the thin crystal walls of the duct, I could hear the guards' footsteps, the clicking of their mandibles as they spoke, the electronic chirp of their surveillance equipment cycling through detection sweeps. I counted cells by the sound of their occupants. Most were empty. 2 held prisoners whose muffled sounds I could not identify. Then, at the far end of the detention corridor, I heard something that made me stop moving entirely. Singing, if you could call it that. A small voice, barely audible, carrying a melody that had no structure and no rhythm, just a wandering series of notes that rose and fell like the breathing of someone who had forgotten what music was supposed to sound like and was trying to remember. It was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. It was a child singing to herself in the dark, because there was no one else to sing to. I positioned myself above an empty cell, adjacent to the one the singing was coming from. The ventilation duct opened into the cell through a grate in the ceiling, and I worked the grate loose with my knife, bending the crystal tabs that held it in place until I could push it aside and lower myself into the cell below. I dropped as quietly as I could, landing in a crouch on the bare crystal floor. The cell was empty, stripped down to nothing but walls and floor, and a dim light panel in the ceiling. The wall between this cell and the next was thick crystal, but not solid. Cracks ran through it, the kind of structural degradation you see in old constructions that have not been maintained properly. Through the widest crack, I could see a faint glow of light from the other side. The singing had stopped. She had heard me. I knelt beside the cracked wall and tapped twice with my knuckle. The sound echoed softly through the crystal. Silence from the other side. A long silence. The kind that comes from a creature who has learned that sounds mean danger, and stillness means survival. Then, very quietly, a voice. "Who is there?" The language was common, the galactic trade tongue, spoken with the particular cadence of someone who had learned it as a second language, and had not had anyone to practice with for a very long time. The voice was high and thin and trembling, and it belonged to a child who was trying very hard to sound brave. "My name is Elias," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I am a human. I am a soldier from the peacekeeping force. I am here to take you home to your mother." Another silence, longer than the first. Then the voice again, and this time there was something in it that was worse than fear. It was hope, the careful, fragile kind of hope that a child holds like a soap bubble, knowing it will burst if she grips too tight. "Humans are real? I thought the guards made you up to scare me." I almost laughed. Almost. The idea that humans were used as a boogeyman to frighten an alien child was both absurd and deeply telling about how the galaxy perceived us. I pressed my hand flat against the cracked wall and spoke through it as clearly as I could. "We are very real, and I am going to get you out of here." "Did my mother send you?" I hesitated. The truth was that her mother did not know I was here. Her mother did not even know she was alive. Nobody had sent me. I had come because I heard a recording of a child crying for her mother, and I could not walk away from it. But the truth was not what this child needed right now. What she needed was the answer that would give her the strength to trust a stranger's voice through a wall. "Yes," I said. "She sent me." I heard a sound from the other side that might have been a sob or might have been a laugh, the two being indistinguishable in moments like these. Then a small hand pressed against the wall from the other side, right where mine rested, and even through the crystal, I swear I could feel the warmth of it. I got to work on the wall. The cracks were my entry point, and I widened them using my knife and a compound from my med kit. It was calcium-based bone repair paste, designed to expand as it set, used normally for stabilizing fractures in the field. I packed it into the deepest cracks, and as it expanded, the crystal groaned and shifted, and new fractures spiderwebbed outward from the old ones. It was slow work. Too slow. I checked the time. The guard's rotation would bring a patrol past these cells in 18 minutes. I needed to be through this wall and gone before then. I put my shoulder against the weakened section and pushed. The crystal resisted, then cracked, then gave way in a shower of fragments that tinkled like broken glass on the floor. The gap was narrow but wide enough for what I needed. I reached through it and found myself looking into a cell identical to mine, lit by the same dim panel, stripped to the same bare walls. And there, pressed against the far corner with her wings folded tight and her eyes so wide they seemed to take up half her face, was Princess Lyrith. She was smaller than I expected. The briefing photos had shown a child surrounded by royal guards and ceremonial regalia, looking polished and healthy. The child in front of me was none of those things. She was gaunt, her crystalline skin dull and flaking, her wings crumpled with tears in the delicate membranes that had clearly never been treated. She was wearing a garment that was too thin for the temperature of the cell, and she was shivering. 6 months. 6 months in this place, with no medical care, no comfort, no contact with anyone who cared about her well-being. I am a medic. I have seen suffering across 3 species and multiple war zones, but looking at that child in that cell, I felt something shift inside my chest that went beyond professional assessment. It was fury, pure and clean, and it burned cold. "Lyrith," I said softly, "come here. We need to go." She did not move. She stared at me with those enormous eyes, and I could see the war happening behind them. Trust versus experience. Hope versus 6 months of learned helplessness. I am a stranger. I am an alien species she has never met in person. I am asking her to leave the only space she knows, however terrible it is, and follow me into the unknown. I did the only thing I could think of. I took off my jacket, the standard issue peacekeeping field jacket, with the Earth insignia on the shoulder, and my name stitched above the pocket, and I held it out through the gap in the wall. "It is warm," I said, "and it has pockets. Good pockets." A child is still a child, no matter the species. Lyrith looked at the jacket. She looked at me. She uncurled from her corner and crossed the cell in small, careful steps, and she took the jacket from my hands and pulled it around her shoulders. It was far too big for her. The sleeves hung past her hands and the hem reached her knees. She wrapped it around herself and gripped the front closed with both hands, and some of the shivering stopped. "There are pockets," she said, discovering them with her fingers. "I told you." She looked up at me, and something in her expression changed. The fear did not go away, but something else grew beside it. Something that looked like a decision being made. "Okay," she said. "Take me to my mom." I lifted her through the gap in the wall, and the moment my arms closed around her, she flinched. It was a full-body flinch, the involuntary recoil of a creature that has learned that being held means being hurt. I froze. I held still. I let her decide. After a moment, her hands found my collar and gripped it, and she pressed her face against my shoulder, and the flinch became something else entirely. She held on like I was the only solid thing in a universe made of breaking glass. I picked her up and moved. Back through the gap. Up through the ventilation grate. Into the duct, with Lyrith clinging to my back, her fingers locked in the fabric of my shirt, her body pressed flat against mine. She understood the danger without being told. She did not speak. She did not cry. She breathed in shallow, silent breaths, and moved when I moved, and froze when I froze. And I thought about the fact that a 6-year-old child had been trained by captivity to be this quiet, and the cold fury in my chest burned a little brighter. We made it through the ventilation system and back into the maintenance tunnels. I was retracing my route toward the drainage channel when we hit the problem. Voices ahead. Not guards. Worse. A maintenance crew, 3 rebels in work coveralls had entered the lower tunnels for a repair cycle. They were working on a conduit junction directly between us and my exit route. I could hear them talking, their mandibles clicking in relaxed conversation. They had no idea I was there. But they were not going to move anytime soon, and behind us, the clock was ticking. Any minute now, a guard would check Lirith's cell and find it empty and the wall broken, and then this fortress would become a death trap. I put Lirith down behind a wide conduit pipe and knelt in front of her. "Close your eyes," I whispered. "Cover your ears. Do not open them until I touch your shoulder. Can you do that?" She nodded. Her eyes were huge, but she closed them and pressed her hands over the sides of her head, where her auditory membranes sat. I straightened up, drew my sidearm, and moved toward the maintenance crew. The first one never saw me. I came around the conduit junction and hit him with a strike to the thoracic nerve cluster that dropped him instantly. The second turned, and I was already inside her reach, too close for her to bring her rifle up, and I drove my palm into the pressure point below her mandible and caught her as she fell. The third had time to react. He grabbed a tool from the workbench and swung it at me, and it caught me across the ribs on my right side with a crack that sent white fire through my chest. I absorbed the blow, stepped inside the arc of his swing, and put him down with a chokehold that compressed the blood flow to his brain until he went limp. 3 down, 11 seconds. I was breathing hard, and my right side was screaming where the tool had connected. Cracked rib, maybe 2. I pressed my hand against it and felt the grind of bone edges that confirmed the diagnosis. From my med kit, I pulled a compression bandage and wrapped it tight around my torso, which would hold the ribs in place and reduce the pain from blinding to merely agonizing. I went back for Lirith. She had her eyes open. She was looking past me at the 3 unconscious rebels on the tunnel floor. "You did not kill them," she said. "No." "Why?" "Because I am a medic. I fix people. Hurting them is the last thing I do when nothing else works." She studied me for a long moment, this strange alien creature that had broken through her wall and carried her through air ducts and fought 3 soldiers without killing any of them. Then she reached out and took my hand, and her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. "I want to go home now," she said. "Then let us go home." I picked her up, and she wrapped her arms around my neck and her legs around my waist, and I started running. Behind us, somewhere in the detention level, an alarm began to sound. It was a piercing crystalline wail that resonated through the entire fortress, bouncing off walls and amplifying itself until the air itself vibrated with it. The sound meant one thing. They had found the empty cell. They knew she was gone. Fortress Korath woke up angry. The fortress was designed to keep things in, and it was very good at its job. The moment that alarm sounded, every door in the lower levels began cycling to lockdown, heavy crystal barriers sliding into place with the grinding inevitability of a trap closing its jaws. I was running through maintenance corridors that were narrowing around me as blast doors dropped from ceiling slots, and I was carrying a child who weighed almost nothing, but whose presence on my back meant that every calculation I made, every turn I took, every risk I assessed, had a variable in it that changed everything. If I were alone, I could take chances. With her, I could not afford a single mistake. The captured rebel comm unit erupted with chatter, commanders barking orders, guard teams mobilizing, search parties being dispatched to every level of the fortress. I caught fragments through my translator as I ran. A human took her. One human, find it. The word they used for me was not him or soldier. It was it, a thing, an animal, a death worlder loose in their walls. I doubled back through a corridor I had already passed through, counting on the assumption that search teams would sweep forward, not backward. It bought me 60 seconds. I used them to seal a blast door behind me by overloading its control panel with a pulse from the power cell I had taken from the rebel patrol. The door locked in the closed position, which would hold until someone came with cutting tools. Then I turned left instead of right, taking a route through the fortress's power distribution center. It was a gamble. The power center would be monitored, possibly guarded, but it also connected to the reactor cooling chambers, and the cooling chambers connected to the lower infrastructure level where my drainage channel waited. The power center was unguarded, Everyone had been pulled to search duty. I passed through banks of humming crystal processors and energy conduits. Lyrith's face pressed against my shoulder, her hands gripping my shirt. She had not spoken since the alarm started. She was being the quietest, bravest person I had ever carried, and I had carried wounded soldiers out of firefights who made more noise than she did. The reactor cooling chamber was the next obstacle, and it was a bad one. My suit's sensors flagged the radiation levels the moment I entered the connecting corridor. Elevated, not immediately lethal, but well above safe exposure limits for Vaylith biology. For a human, the exposure would be manageable in the short term, painful in the medium term, and potentially serious in the long term. For Lyrith, even brief exposure could damage her already weakened immune system. I stopped, shifted her from my back to my chest, and wrapped my arms around her. I pulled the jacket tighter around her body, overlapping the folds to create as much shielding as my body and the fabric could provide. Then I pressed her face against my chest, covering her head with my hand. "Keep your face right here," I said. "Do not lift your head until I tell you." "Why? What is in there?" "Something that will make you feel sick if you breathe too much of it, but it cannot get through me. I am a Deathworlder, remember?" The guards said Deathworlders are monsters. The guards were wrong about a lot of things. I ran through the cooling chamber. The radiation hit me like walking into a warm wall, a full-body prickling sensation that intensified with every step until it felt like my skin was being gently sandpapered from the inside. My eyes watered, my teeth ached. Somewhere deep in my cells, molecular bonds were being disrupted by ionizing radiation in ways that my body would have to repair later, assuming there was a later. The chamber was 40 meters long. I covered it in under 30 seconds, and the whole time I kept Lyrith pressed against my chest, with my body between her and the worst of the exposure. On the far side, my suit's sensors showed my radiation dose climbing into the yellow zone. Not critical yet, but the clock was now ticking on my biology, as well as our escape. I had hours before the symptoms would become debilitating. I intended to be far from here by then. The lower infrastructure level was chaos. Search teams were sweeping the maintenance tunnels, their lights cutting through the dim corridors, as they checked every compartment and access hatch. I could hear them ahead of me, behind me, above me. The net was closing. I pressed into a gap between two conduit pipes that was too narrow for a Vaylith body, and held my breath as a 4-soldier patrol passed within 3 meters of my position. Lyrith was absolutely still against my chest. I could feel her heartbeat through my shirt, rapid and light, like the wings of a small bird. The patrol passed. I moved again, following the route I had memorized on the way in, working toward the western face and the drainage channel. 2 more patrol teams crossed my path, and both times I found spaces to hide that no Vaylith would think to check because no Vaylith could fit into them. That was my only advantage now. I was smaller, narrower, and more flexible than every soldier hunting me, and I could disappear into the architecture of their own fortress in ways they could not imagine. I reached the drainage channel entrance and almost wept with relief. Almost. The channel was exactly as I had left it, narrow and foul and beautiful in its promise of escape. Getting in the first time had been difficult. Getting out while carrying a child and nursing cracked ribs and accumulating radiation damage was going to be something else entirely. I shifted Lyrith to my back again. "Hold on tight," I told her. "Do not let go for anything. This is going to be unpleasant, and it is going to smell terrible, but it is going to take us outside." Worse than the cell? Different kind of terrible. Okay. I entered the channel head first and began to crawl. The walls closed in immediately, scraping against my injured shoulders, pressing against my cracked ribs with every breath. Behind me, Lyrith clung to my back with her arms around my neck, her face buried between my shoulder blades. She was whimpering now, soft, involuntary sounds that she could not suppress, and each one was a knife in my chest because I could not comfort her and crawl at the same time. Behind us, I heard shouting. Soldiers at the channel entrance. They had found my entry point, traced my route through the fortress, and followed me here. Flashlight beams stabbed into the channel, illuminating the narrow space in harsh white light. I heard a soldier try to enter and get stuck within the first meter, his thorax too wide, his wings catching on the walls. Another tried. Same result. Then someone made a decision that I had been dreading. They started firing into the channel. Plasma bolts screamed past us in the narrow space, the superheated energy scorching the walls and filling the channel with steam and the smell of burning crystal. The shots were blind, aimed without precision. But in a space this confined, precision was not strictly necessary. I flattened myself over Lirith, covering her body with mine, and kept crawling as fire streaked above my head and impacted the walls around us. A bolt passed so close to my ear that it singed my hair. Another hit the wall directly beside my hand and sprayed me with molten crystal fragments that burned through my sleeve and into the skin of my forearm. Lirith was screaming now, not whimpering, screaming. The sound echoed through the channel and mixed with the shriek of plasma fire, and it was the worst symphony I had ever heard. I kept crawling, one arm forward, pull, other arm, pull, drag the body, protect the child, repeat. The channel seemed to go on forever, a tunnel of filth and fire and pain that had no end. And I kept moving through it, because that is what humans do. We keep moving. Through anything. Through everything. Through the impossible and the unbearable, and the moments when every rational part of your brain is screaming at you to stop. We burst out of the channel into open air, and the night hit me like cold water after a fever. Stars overhead, crystal formations glittering in moonlight. The western face of the fortress rising behind us like a cliff of dark glass. I rolled clear of the channel exit and pulled Lirith off my back and held her at arm's length to check her, trembling, crying, covered in grime, but no burns, no wounds, no plasma damage. My body had shielded hers through the entire crawl. "You are okay," I told her. "You are out. We are outside." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. And then she looked past me at the sky, and her expression changed in a way I will never forget. She had not seen the sky in 6 months. 6 months of ceiling and walls and a single light panel. She stared upward at the stars with her mouth open and her damaged wings twitching involuntarily, and she raised one small hand toward the sky as if she could touch it. Then searchlights swept across the mountainside, and the moment ended. Rebel scout vehicles were lifting off from the fortress's upper platforms, their lights cutting through the darkness in systematic search patterns. They would find us in minutes if we stayed here. I grabbed Lirith and ran. Not toward Loyalist lines. That route was too obvious, too long, and the rebels would cut us off within the hour. Instead, I headed for the electromagnetic storm zone I had crossed on the way in, the plateau where the air crackled with enough energy to overwhelm Valith biosensors and stop their hearts. The rebels would not follow us there. They could not. The run to the plateau took 20 minutes at full sprint, and by the end of it, I was operating on reserves I did not know I had. The cracked ribs ground with every breath. The radiation exposure was manifesting as waves of nausea that I swallowed and ignored. The burns on my forearm throbbed with every heartbeat. Lirith clung to me and said nothing, and when I looked down at her face, her eyes were closed, and her jaw was set, and she looked like a soldier who had accepted the mission and was committed to seeing it through. We hit the storm zone at a dead run, and the effect was immediate. The air thickened with electromagnetic energy, and arcs of lightning snapped between crystal spires with sounds like cracking whips. My skin prickled. My hair stood on end. The headache from my earlier crossing came back with reinforcements, slamming behind my eyes like a fist. But I could handle it. My biology could take this. Lirith could not. She screamed the moment we entered the storm field. Not from fear, from pain. The electromagnetic interference was agony for her species, overloading the bioelectric sensory organs that Valith used for everything from navigation to emotional communication. It was like plunging a human into a room of deafening noise and blinding light simultaneously. Her hands clawed at her head, pressing against her sensory membranes, and her body convulsed against mine. I held her tighter and started talking. I do not remember exactly what I said. I talked about anything and everything that had nothing to do with where we were and what was happening. I talked about Earth. I told her about rain, how it falls from clouds and hits the ground and makes a sound like 1,000 tiny drums playing all at once. I told her about oceans, vast bodies of water, so large you cannot see the other side. where waves roll in and crash on beaches, made of sand, that gets between your toes and never entirely comes out. I told her about dogs, how they have 4 legs and fur and tails that wag when they are happy, which is most of the time, because dogs have figured out something that the rest of us are still working on, which is that every moment is worth being happy about if you decide it is. "What is a dog?" she asked through clenched teeth, her face pressed against my chest. "A dog is an animal from Earth that decided a long time ago that humans were worth being friends with, and it has never changed its mind." "Do they really chase their own tails?" "Every single one of them." "That is the funniest thing I have ever heard. When this is over, I will show you one, I promise." We walked through the storm, one foot in front of the other, lightning crashing around us, Lirith's screams fading to whimpers, fading to silence as she pressed her face into my chest and listened to my voice and held on. The storm lasted for 2 kilometers. It felt like 200. On the far side, the air cleared, and the electromagnetic field dropped to background levels, and Lirith's body relaxed against mine as the pain in her sensory organs faded. She was breathing hard but conscious. She looked up at me with eyes that were wet and exhausted and absolutely certain. "You are very strange," she said. "I have been told. But you are also very warm, and you keep talking. No one has talked to me in a long time." I shifted her in my arms and checked my comm unit. The atmospheric ionization from the storm had given the unit a momentary signal boost. For perhaps 30 seconds, I had a clear transmission channel. I keyed in my identification code and spoke as fast as I could. "This is Sergeant Elias Cade, Human Peacekeeping Attachment, identification number 7742. I have Princess Lirith. She is alive. Repeat, the princess is alive. I am requesting immediate extraction at the following coordinates." I transmitted my position. "Someone tell the Queen her daughter is alive." The channel dissolved into static. I did not know if the message had gotten through. I did not know if anyone had heard a single word. The signal was gone, and I was standing on the edge of a dark forest on an alien world, with a child in my arms, and nothing left to do but keep walking. So I did, one foot in front of the other, through the crystal forest and into the night. Lirith fell asleep against my chest somewhere in the first hour, her breathing evening out, her hands relaxing their grip on my shirt, but not letting go entirely. I walked with her head on my shoulder, and her heartbeat against my ribs, and the stars overhead, and the absolute, bone-deep exhaustion of a body that had been pushed past every reasonable limit and was now operating on nothing but the stubborn refusal to stop that is the defining characteristic of every human who has ever lived. I walked because stopping was not something I knew how to do. Not tonight. Not with her weight against my chest and her breath on my neck, and the word, "Mom," echoing in my memory like a promise I intended to keep. I reached the extraction coordinates at dawn, and the first thing I did was fall down. Not dramatically, not heroically. I just stopped walking, and my legs stopped holding me, and I went down onto my knees in the middle of a flat clearing in the crystal forest, with Lirith still sleeping against my chest. The morning light was filtering through the translucent trees, casting prismatic patterns across the ground that shimmered and shifted with every breath of wind, and I thought distantly that it was beautiful, and then I thought less distantly that my vision was doing strange things at the edges, blurring and darkening in ways that had nothing to do with the light. The radiation. It was catching up to me. My body had been running on adrenaline for long enough that the damage had been stacking up without symptoms, and now that the adrenaline was fading, the bill was coming due. Nausea rolled through me in waves. My hands were shaking in a way I could not control. My skin felt hot and tight, and when I pressed my fingers against my wrist to check my own pulse, the rhythm was uneven, in a way that made the medic part of my brain go very quiet and very focused. I laid Lirith down gently on the soft ground cover, which glowed faintly blue under her weight. She stirred, but did not wake. I ran my medkit's diagnostic scanner over her, checking her vitals with the same clinical precision I would use on any patient, even though my hands were trembling and my vision kept sliding sideways. She was dehydrated, malnourished. Her wings needed medical attention, and the torn membranes showed signs of infection that had been slowly spreading for weeks without treatment. But her core functions were stable, her heartbeat was strong, her breathing was even. She was going to be okay. I sat back on my heels and looked at the sky and waited. The clearing I had chosen was large enough for a landing zone, flat enough for a safe approach, and far enough from the storm zone that extraction vehicles would not be affected by electromagnetic interference. It was a good spot. If my message had gotten through, it was exactly where rescue would come. If my message had not gotten through, it was just a pretty place to sit while I figured out what to do next. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The crystal forest sang in the morning heat, the trees producing faint harmonic tones as their structures expanded with temperature changes, creating a constant, quiet music that was unlike anything on Earth. Lirith woke and sat beside me, and said nothing for a long time, just looking at the forest and the sky, and the light with the stunned, overwhelmed expression of someone who has been in darkness so long that the world has become too much to process all at once. "Is it always this bright?" she asked. "On my world, yes, even brighter sometimes." I forgot what colors look like. I gave her water from my canteen and the last of my ration bars, and watched her eat with the slow, deliberate care of someone who had learned not to trust that food would keep coming. She held each bite in her mouth for a long time before swallowing, as if she wanted to make sure it was real. No extraction arrived. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3. I began to accept that my message had not gotten through. The nearest loyalist outpost was 40 kilometers to the east. I could make it. On a good day, with rest and supplies and no injuries, it would be a manageable hike. Today, with cracked ribs and radiation sickness and burns, and a child who could not walk that distance on her own, it was a different calculation entirely. I stood up. My legs buckled, and I caught myself with one hand on the ground. The clearing tilted sideways, righted itself, tilted again. I took a breath, and pushed through the dizziness, and got my feet under me. One step, then another. I could do this. 40 kilometers was nothing. Humans had crossed continents on foot. Humans had walked across deserts and through blizzards, and over mountains that touched the sky. 40 kilometers through an alien forest was a morning stroll by comparison. All I had to do was keep moving. I made it 6 steps before my legs gave out again. Lirith was at my side immediately, pulling at my arm with hands that were too small and too weak to lift me, but that pulled with everything they had. "Get up," she said, and there was an urgency in her voice that bordered on command. "You have to get up. You cannot stop now. You said you would take me to my mother. You promised." "I will," I said from the ground, and I meant it with every fiber of my failing body. "Just need a minute." "You do not have a minute. You are sick. I can feel your temperature through your skin. You are burning." She was right. The radiation was manifesting as a fever now, and my body's attempts to repair the cellular damage were generating heat that was pushing my core temperature into dangerous territory. I reached into my medkit with numb fingers and found the anti-radiation medication I had been saving. It was a single-dose injector, designed for emergency use, effective at slowing cellular breakdown, but not stopping it. I pressed it against my thigh and triggered it, and the medication hit my bloodstream like ice water, cooling the fever from the inside and buying me time. How much time I did not know. Enough to walk 40 kilometers? Maybe, maybe not. I got up. My legs held this time, shakily, like stilts made of something that was not quite sure about its structural integrity. I reached down for Lirith, and she took my hand and looked up at me with those enormous eyes. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Can you?" "I think so, if you hold my hand." We started walking, 2 figures moving through a crystal forest at dawn, a tall human and a small alien child, hand in hand, moving east toward safety at the pace of the slower one, which was sometimes her and sometimes me. We did not talk much. Walking took everything I had, and Lirith seemed to understand that silence was a kindness when someone is using all their energy to stay upright. Then I heard it. A sound, low and distant, felt more than heard at first. A vibration in the ground, and the air that made the crystal trees hum a different note. Lirith heard it too. She stopped walking and tilted her head, her sensory membranes flaring as they tried to identify the frequency. "Ships," she said. My heart rate spiked. Ships could mean rescue or pursuit. I pulled Lirith behind a crystal formation and crouched beside her, watching the sky. The sound grew louder, and then I saw them. Shapes against the morning sun, coming from the east, from Loyalist territory. 3, then 5, then 8 ships in formation, moving with the precise coordination of a military escort. They were Valith design, sleek crystalline hulls that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows, and they were flying the royal colors. The Queen's personal guard. Flanking them, in delta formation, were 2 ships of a very different design. Blocky, angular, painted in the gray and blue of the human peacekeeping corps. Combat gunships. Our gunships. The message had gotten through. They were landing in the clearing, engines roaring, crystal dust billowing outward in clouds that caught the morning light and turned it to gold. Hatches opened. Soldiers poured out. Valith loyalists in full combat armor, moving in tactical formation to secure the perimeter. Behind them, human peacekeepers in their heavier gear, rifles up, scanning the tree line. Medics with stretchers, officers with communicators. An entire rescue operation unfolding with the coordinated precision of a military machine that had been given a target and mobilized at maximum speed. And then, through the ranks of soldiers, through the dust and the light and the noise, a figure emerged that moved faster than all of them. She was tall for a Valith, taller than any I had seen, and she wore ceremonial armor that was not designed for battle, but that she wore now because she had not taken the time to change. Her wings were spread wide, catching the light and throwing prisms across the clearing. Her crystalline skin blazed with bioluminescence, colors cascading across her body in waves that shifted with every step. She was not walking, she was running. The Queen of the Valith sovereignty, Sovereign Thesara, ruler of 1,000 worlds, was running across a forest clearing like a woman who had just been told the impossible. Lirith stepped out from behind the crystal formation. She was still wearing my jacket, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the fabric trailing behind her like a cape. Her damaged wings twitched. Her dull skin flickered with the faintest echo of bioluminescence, responding to her mother's light. She opened her mouth, and the sound that came out was the sound that had started all of this. The same sound I had heard on a recording in an abandoned outpost a lifetime ago. But this time it was not a whisper. This time it was a shout, raw and breaking and full of everything a child's voice can carry when it speaks the one word that matters more than any other. "Mom, Mom, I am back. He saved me." Thesara dropped to her knees in the crystal dust. She did not slow down and kneel, she simply dropped, as if her legs had made the same decision mine had made earlier, the decision that the body has reached its destination and standing is no longer necessary. Lirith ran to her. The child ran on legs that were too thin and too weak, stumbling over the hem of my jacket, arms outstretched, and she crashed into her mother's chest with a force that nearly knocked the Queen backward. The sound Thesara made when she caught her daughter is not a sound I can describe in any human language. It was not a word, it was not a cry. It was something that existed before language, before civilization, before species differentiated and spread across the stars. It was the sound a mother makes when she holds a child she was certain she would never hold again, and it resonated through the crystal clearing with a force that vibrated in my bones. They held each other. The Queen's bioluminescence exploded into patterns I had never seen before, cascading waves of gold and silver and deep violet that rolled across her skin and transferred to Lirith wherever they touched, lighting up the child's dull skin with borrowed warmth. Lirith was crying, and Thesara was crying, and the crystalline tears of the Valith catch the light the same way their blood does, so mother and daughter wept in prisms, surrounded by light. I watched from where I stood, leaning against the crystal formation, because my legs had decided they were finished, and I realized that the entire clearing had gone silent. Every soldier, Valith and human alike, had stopped moving. They stood in their positions, weapons lowered, and they watched. I saw Valith warriors, soldiers who had fought this civil war for years and carried scars on their chitinous bodies, weeping openly. Crystalline tears streamed down faces that were trained to show nothing, because some things bypass training and rank and species and reach straight into the part of every living being that knows what love looks like. I saw my fellow human soldiers, battle-hardened veterans who had served in conflicts across the galaxy, standing with tears running down their faces. A corporal I did not recognize had his hand over his mouth. A lieutenant was blinking rapidly and failing to pretend she was not crying. A Korathi diplomatic observer, who had come with the rescue squadron, was recording everything on a device that trembled in her shaking hands. Then Thesara looked up. Her eyes, still streaming, found me across the clearing. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin shifted, and even without understanding Valith color language, I could feel the intensity of what she was communicating. She rose to her feet, still holding Lyrith against her chest with one arm, and she walked toward me. Each step scattered light across the clearing. Lyrith saw me first. She reached out from her mother's arms, extending one small hand, and grabbed my fingers with a grip that had not weakened since the first time she held my hand in that dark cell. "This is him, Mom," she said. "This is the human. He carried me through the storm. He told me about dogs." Thesara studied me. I tried to stand at attention, because that seemed like the appropriate thing to do when a queen is standing in front of you. But my body had other ideas. I swayed. The clearing tilted. I started to fall, and Thesara caught me with her free arm, one hand gripping my shoulder with a strength that surprised me. So there we were. An alien queen holding her rescued daughter in one arm, and a broken human soldier in the other, standing in a clearing full of weeping soldiers, bathed in morning light that turned the crystal forest into a cathedral of color. She spoke, her voice carried across the clearing, pitched to reach every ear, every sensor, every recording device. And it was steady, and it was clear, and it was the voice of a sovereign who had just learned something about the universe that she would never forget. "The galaxy told us humans were dangerous," she said. "They told us your species was violent and reckless and unpredictable. They were right. You are all of those things, and my daughter is alive because of it. This soldier, this medic, this man who heals instead of harms, crossed our deadliest terrain alone, entered a fortress no army could breach, and brought my child back to me, not because he was ordered to, not because he was paid to, but because he heard a child call for her mother, and he could not walk away." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked on the first word, and the crack made it more powerful than any perfect delivery could have been. "The galaxy calls you Deathworlders. I call you something else. I call you the species that walks through fire to bring a child home." I do not remember much after that. The medics got to me, human medics with stretchers and IV lines and radiation treatment protocols. I remember being lowered onto a stretcher and looking up at the sky through the crystal canopy. I remember Lyrith leaning over me, her face still wearing the ghost of my jacket's collar, saying, "You have to be okay, because you promised me a dog." I remember trying to tell her I would be fine, and the words coming out wrong, because my mouth had stopped cooperating with my brain. I woke up on a human medical ship 2 days later. The room was white and clean, and hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced medical equipment doing what it does best. My ribs were mended, my burns were treated, my radiation levels were dropping under the steady administration of cellular repair compounds that were slowly undoing the damage I had accumulated in Fortress Korath's reactor chamber. I was alive, which honestly surprised me. The room was filled with crystalline flowers, hundreds of them, in arrangements that covered every flat surface, and hung from brackets on the walls and filled the air with a scent that was sweet and complex and entirely alien. A Valith gesture of gratitude, I learned later, reserved for those who have performed acts of extraordinary service. There was a commendation from the Peacekeeping Command on my bedside table, a message from my government. Requests for interviews from a dozen galactic media outlets. But what I kept looking at, what I could not stop looking at, was a small picture taped to the monitor beside my bed. It was drawn in bioluminescent ink on a sheet of crystalline paper, the kind of drawing a child makes when they are trying very hard and have not yet learned that art is supposed to look like something specific. It showed 2 figures. The tall one was standing upright, with a lopsided smile and lines on his arms that might have been scrapes, or might have been sleeves. The small one was beside him, with wings that were too big for her body, and a glow around her, that the ink captured by being applied in layers until it shimmered. Between the figures, there were jagged lines that represented the storm. Above them, there were circles that represented stars. At the bottom, in shaky common script that leaned to the left and wobbled on every vowel, were the words, "My friend Elias. He told me about dogs. He is very brave, and also very stubborn." I stared at that drawing for a long time, and I was not ashamed of the tears. The recording of the reunion went across the galaxy within hours. Every species, every world, every network carried it. The image of a child running to her mother, the sound of "Mom" shouted across a clearing, the sight of a queen on her knees, weeping in colors. It spread because it was true, and true things have a frequency that resonates across every barrier that civilization has ever constructed. Species that had dismissed humans as brutish deathworlders were confronted with the reality of a human soldier nearly dying to reunite an alien mother and child. Governments that had issued polite statements of concern were shamed by the image of a single man doing what their entire diplomatic apparatus had failed to accomplish. Warlord Drozen's support collapsed within weeks. The galaxy had seen what he had done to a child, and the fury was universal. His commanders defected. His supply lines were cut. His allies distanced themselves with the speed of politicians who could read public sentiment. The civil war that had ground on for years turned decisively in the Queen's favor. And it turned, not because of a military breakthrough, but because one human, with a medkit and a sidearm, had shown the galaxy what Drozen truly was. 3 weeks after the rescue, I was summoned to the royal court. I stood in a hall of crystal that was older than human civilization, surrounded by dignitaries and officers and representatives from a dozen species, and sovereign Thesara placed around my neck the highest decoration the Valith sovereignty could bestow on a non-Valith citizen. It was a crystalline medallion that pulsed with bioluminescent light, keyed to the wearer's heartbeat, so that it glowed in rhythm with my pulse. The symbolism, I was told, was that the recipient's heart now beat in synchrony with the sovereignty itself. But that was not the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered happened after the ceremony, when the dignitaries were mingling and the protocol officers were organizing the formal reception, and I was standing by a window looking out at the royal gardens below. A small hand grabbed mine and pulled with a familiar insistence. "Come see," Lyrith said. "I have to show you something." She dragged me through corridors and down staircases and out into the gardens, which were the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen. Crystal flowers of every color grew in patterns that shifted with the sunlight, blooming and closing, and blooming again, in cycles that created a constant, gentle motion across the entire garden. Lyrith pulled me from one section to another, talking a mile a minute about each variety, which ones she had planted herself, which ones were her favorites, which ones smelled like the morning, and which ones smelled like the evening. She was transformed. The gaunt, shivering child I had pulled through a wall was gone. Her skin was bright and iridescent again, her eyes clear, her voice strong. Her wings were healing, new membrane growing over the tears, and though they were not yet strong enough for flight, they fluttered with excitement as she moved through the garden. She was a child again, not a hostage, not a prisoner, a child, running and laughing and talking too fast and forgetting to finish one sentence before starting the next. "When can I see a dog?" she asked, stopping suddenly in front of a crystal flower that was taller than she was. "Soon," I said. "I will arrange it." "Do they really chase their own tails?" "I already told you. Yes." "Tell me again." "Yes, they really chase their own tails, round and round in circles, and they never catch them, and they never stop trying. That is still the funniest thing I have ever heard." She ran ahead through the garden, and I watched her go. This child who had whispered "Mom" in a dark cell. This child who had held onto my collar through ventilation ducts and firefights and drainage channels and electromagnetic storms. This child who had called me brave and stubborn in bioluminescent ink and taped the assessment to my hospital monitor. I stood in an alien garden on a world so far from Oregon that the distance could not be measured in numbers that made intuitive sense. And I watched a rescued child laugh in the sunlight. And I thought about the recording. The recording that had started everything. The recording of a small voice in the dark, asking why her mother would not come. Asking the question that has no answer except action. Except someone standing up and walking east, and crawling through the worst the universe can offer, because a child needed to go home. The galaxy calls us Deathworlders. They call us dangerous and reckless and unpredictable. They say we are a species that does not know when to stop, that fights past the point of reason, that refuses to accept what every rational analysis tells us is impossible. They are right. We are all of those things. And that is why the garden has a child in it today. I watched Lyrith chase a crystal butterfly between the flower beds, her laughter rising into the alien sky like something new being added to the universe. Every bruise, every bullet graze, every meter of that crawl through that drainage channel, every step through the storm with her screaming against my chest. Worth it. Every single moment of it was worth it. Because some things are universal. The need for safety, the need for home, the sound of a child laughing for her mother. These things do not change across species or worlds, or the vast distances between stars. They are the constants, the fixed points around which everything else orbits. And if being human means being the species that will cross those distances, walk through that fire, and crawl through that darkness to protect those constants, then I am proud of what I am. My name is Elias Cade. I am a medic. I fix people. And sometimes, when the universe demands it, I bring them home.